Evening, everyone. Right now we are sat on top of where Old Oak Common Station will be. There's the Crossrail depot and the HS2 station over there, and over here is North Pole depot, whizzing past. And look, this HS2 stuff happening. It's over there right now. See many 345s. This is the location of a flashpoint because it's the first situation where we are seeing the massive negative consequences of probably Crossrail and the Elizabeth Line's biggest mistake, and certainly their most costly mistake, that will have an impact for the rest of history of the operation of this railway line. And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight.
And hello, yes, I'm here. It's all good. We had. I'm running the shop on my own tonight with Dean in hospital, so hence why we're a little bit late to start. Anyway, before we get started, as ever, the dear patron supporters, thank you. For £5 or above, you get the How the Rails Will Fix the Future audiobook and a weekly bonus Rail Natter episode. Plus the back catalogue, now a fair number of bonus episodes. You get to vote and input on content and lots of extra bits, all for £5 or more. Without further ado, everyone, welcome to tonight's Rail Natter.
And as the Intercity 225 fades away...
Elizabeth Line service to Reading.
Thank you, train lady. Yes, this is the Elizabeth Line. I'm on Crossrail 345. And yes, tonight we're going to be talking about Crossrail, the Elizabeth Line's biggest mistake, the most costly mistake they made, and the one that's having the biggest impact on passengers and will do for a long time still. But we're going to talk about how it gets fixed. Why? Well, it's because last week the Campaign for Level Boarding, of which I'm a co-founder, released its letter to Network Rail and to the project at Old Oak Common, talking about, endorsing their proposals to achieve level boarding by providing a non-compliant high platform. This has confused a few people. They're going, well, why is that the right thing to do? Old Oak Common has very unique conditions. This video will explain why those particular proposals deserve to be endorsed and what the implications are of accepting those proposals are on the rest of the Elizabeth Line and accessibility on the rest of the railway network across the country.
Hello, yes. So here's the letter. Here it is. So a little bit like, what is the Campaign for Level Boarding? So the Campaign for Level Boarding, interestingly enough, its history is somewhat intertwined with the history of the Elizabeth Line, because this failure, this massive design failure, which we're going to talk about momentarily, really is what spurred myself and others in, particularly Thomas Ray down Step Free London blog, into actually creating the campaign to raise awareness, because a lack of awareness of the system approach to delivering level boarding was a key reason why it was not, the level boarding as a system following the national standards was not pursued for Crossrail. But we'll get there. So this letter went out, open letter to Network Rail regarding level boarding at Old Oak Common Station from the campaign, endorsed by the campaign, being sent over to Philip over at Network Rail, who's the technical sponsor for level boarding for the Old Oak Common Station project. But what is that? What is Old Oak Common? What's that all about? What is that? Old Oak Common, here it is. It is, or rather, here is a render-out version of it. Old Oak Common is the station that will be second last or the first as you come out of London, or the second last. Well, the last, I guess, before the terminus of HS2. So coming through between Birmingham and here, this is kind of outer London, a bit of a hub to allow connections onto the Western Main Line and onto Crossrail. Well, because it will involve a total of 14 platforms. Have I done my sums right? Yes. Those platforms being 6 high-speed platforms, 4 Elizabeth Line platforms, and 4 Great Western platforms. So the high-speed platforms are down below HS2 going through, and you've got 8 platforms on the Great Western Main Line. So this becomes a pretty major kind of station hub in this part of London, providing links, frustratingly not quite as directly, but also will have links to the overground as well, to some of those kind of orbital routes. So here's the picture of the actual thing under construction. You can see that actually the building of the station itself has already progressed. You can see here that this drone shot floating. You can see the station box with the construction of the actual high-speed 2 station in there, and you can see the curvature of the Great Western Main Line station under construction. So construction progress being well progressed, and it also nestled in amongst several big depots as well. You've got North Pole depot full of Hitachis, and you've got Alstom's depot with Crossrail trains on the other side. So trains galore. It's a busy little corner, this bit here. So that then leads to the question of what is the Elizabeth line? What is that? Elizabeth line. Elizabeth line, aka Crossrail, as the civil engineering project was called that delivered the Elizabeth line. Also, as RailNatter viewers, long-time RailNatter viewers will know, Thameslink 2. Crossrail. It is £26.4 billion worth of railway project in today's money that delivered lots and lots of trains, lots and lots of high-capacity railway service through I think it's about 73 miles total of railway, but with central section tunnels. But having spent that 26 plus billion quid in today's money, 20 billion about pretty much 20 billion in 2018 pennies. This is the problem. This is the big problem, which is that Crossrail took the approach of building within the central section high platforms, so 1100 millimeter high platforms. A bit of detail here. So this is, London Assembly Transport Committee leader Caroline Pidgeon says non-standard height platforms on the central section of the Elizabeth line in London will make journeys unnecessarily complicated and burdensome for those with disabilities. A Department of Transport spokesman told Rail that Crossrail did not receive a derogation to build the platforms at a different height to the national standard, but confirmed that the Secretary of State for Transport, issued a dispensation under Regulation 46 of the Railways Interoperability Regulations 2011 in order to build the platforms higher. This meant neither the ORR nor Transport for London needed to be consulted about the change. Yes, interesting. Now, why was 1100 millimeters selected, this higher platform? Incidentally, about the same height that the Thameslink central section platforms were built at. So similar design logic. This is coming from a similar place. Partly because there was already a precedent for this high platform position on Heathrow Express and therefore in Heathrow's tunnelled stations, which would be used by the Crossrail services. But that's not really a justification. That was also an incorrect decision made. And why was that decision made? So that's a few platforms that could have been corrected for a minimal amount to build the rest of the system to be compliant with the rest of the national network. Therefore, avoiding the problem that we're about to see momentarily. Well, because the Aventra here, seen here, as you can see, this is a Class 345. This thing, or rather, as you can see, it's not, is it? It's a networker. Is the same design. The Aventra is the same design of train that British Rail, Braille had been developing and delivering for multiple decades. It's pretty much exactly the same thing, really. Lots of bogey updates and blah blah blah. But ultimately, the vehicle profile and the whole thing, the design of the train was based on an existing enormous fleet. The networkers and then the Electrostar fleet, all sort of the same long running family of trains, and built with the standard floor height, as many trains have in the UK, of about 1100 millimeters above rail level. And rather than challenging that, as we found out subsequently with Stadler providing trains that have a low floor to match the platform height, rather than challenging that, it was the accepted wisdom that, to deliver level boarding, you have to raise the platform. So anyway, 11th of May 2018, Sure enough, we can see here from the in the exceptions and decisions, the exemptions and decisions section of the DFT website. One of those dispensations, Crossrail Limited, Infrastructure Regulation 46 dispensation against the notified national technical rule for platform heights granted. So there we go. Job done. Whoops. And so the result is that you have the wonderful-ish, fairly decent level boarding in the central section tunnels, as you can see from the top there, at one end of the spectrum, and you might, as a passenger, get on expecting that to be the same across the whole system, when actually you might find yourself in the conditions as the woman at the bottom here, stepping up from Platform 4 at Ealing Broadway with an enormous, totally unacceptable platform train interface to get onto 345. The most extreme example of the inside of a curve combined with the Great Western's generally lower platforms. And also the intransigence of central government and the London's mayoral transport authority not paying to correct these platforms at all, just accepting that they are what they are. Tough luck. Not good enough. So what does this actually mean materially? So here is the Crossrail network as it is today, and here is how much of it is actually accessible. Because just having a step like that means that you cannot travel independently, means that the system is not fully accessible, means that it is of the 20th century, not of the 21st century. A reminder that we've been doing level boarding for decades, so actually even that is a bit cheeky. So yeah, a vastly reduced scale of network there, you can see. Abbeywood, by the way, shows that it's not fully step-free from train to street to train, but actually is for Crossrail. It's just that the two... Well, we'll get there. We'll talk about that. So that's the reduction of the network that comes from this decision.
Thanks to the decision made by the Department for Transport and Transport for London to use a high-floor train and a non-standard platform, the Elizabeth line has locked in a serious challenge for accessibility for the lifetime of that project. There are, however, two factors that go in its favour for making the decision about Old Oak Common and what platform to choose from. Those two factors are thus. The first is that the cost of changing the central section tunnels, the central section platforms, reducing the height of those to 915 millimetres for the long term, and also the challenges of doing so with a fleet, the relationship with a fleet, these things going off behind me, and updating those and providing a new fleet of trains, sequencing that will be far more complex and costly than actually staging the adjustments of outlier stations like here at Abbey Wood. That's factor one. Factor two is that operationally, it absolutely makes more sense as ever with Crossrail, the Elizabeth line being an extremely high density suburban railway network, to continue to further segregate the operation of these services onto their own line, onto their own network, as the S&C changes, essentially getting rid of the challenge of needing multiple platform heights.
So the question is, how do you fix it? So we've got this problem. We have a situation where we have locked in 1100 millimeter platform heights in the central section, and we have the national standard platform position nominally, if not quite a substantial difference from it, on the outer stations, those fringe stations, two different platform heights, and a train fleet that, the challenge being that swapping those trains out to swap new trains in whilst adjusting the physical platforms is a real challenge, at least from a staging perspective. So, how do you fix it?
This is Canary Wharf Elizabeth line station, and it's massive. Look, it's huge. It's huge, and it gives us the perfect example of explaining why the cost of adjusting, the interface between basically adjusting the PTI from 1100 down to 915 is astronomical. Now, the first thing you might say is, well, reduce the platform height, right? Reasons why that's tricky. Reason number one, you have to adjust all of the platform edge doors. So all these platform edge doors, the screens, all of those need adjusting. Every single one would have to be adjusted. So that's number one. You then have a platform, you see that there's a slight slope here away from the platform edge. You'd have to go through and adjust all of that, completely rebuild that. All of these column edges would require physical work. All the escalators would require rebuilding. all of the little cupboards with fire access. No. So forget that. So you're not adjusting platforms. So what can be done then? Well, what you do in these tunnels, in these circumstances, and this is kind of what I'd advocated for in the past, is that you come in and you can look through here, you can just about see the track slab down there. What you do is actually lift the track. So you lift the track slab. Now for the actual track slab itself here, not necessarily a catastrophic amount of additional work. Like you make the adjustment 185 millimeters up, not necessarily catastrophic. The problem isn't necessarily through the station though. The problem is through here, and specifically up there.
Yes, because, and here is me jumping back flipping years ago, actually, possibly even 2018 again, or maybe even earlier than that. Anyway, me a very long time ago, actually, no, God, years ago, me inside that very station, in fact, just the other side where I was gesticulating, because that inside there that's the column I was pointing out earlier, but from the track level, me sneaking through, looking through a sheet, looking into Canary Wharf Station, because I went for an adventure. And if you want to see where I was referring to, so here, in fact, let's get my. So I was stood and gesticulating kind of around about here, right, looking out this way, and what you can see here is kind of what I'm talking about. You can see that the platform level is sort of straight. Then there is a vertical curve in the track. And then the tracks drop down quite severely on a sort of flat, on a falling grade once you're outside of the platform. So let's talk about why that is, and what that looks like, and why that becomes a problem. So first thing you do when you're building a station for Crossrail is you bore the tunnel through. So you've got the bored pilot tunnel. And then there are a couple of approaches you can take to building the station. The first is that you excavate the station tunnels using the pilot. So you've got escalator shafts and so on and so on. The other way is that from the bored pilot tunnel, you create a big excavated station box. Kind of the result's the same. You've got that pilot. Now, either side of the station, you have this sort of the tunnels rise to come into the station, basically meaning that as trains come into, and this is as old, a design approach as old as time when it comes to underground stations, it means that you reduce the energy required to brake the train as it arrives into the station, and you reduce the energy as the train falls away as it leaves and departs, so that you less energy to accelerate away, less energy to brake on arrival. Also means that your station is close to the surface, which is good because you reduce the depth of escalators and depth of the dig. Meanwhile, the continuous tunnel can just kind of do what it likes and gets a bit lower if it needs to go underneath things. So this is generally the design of most, if not all, of the stations, the new underground stations within the central section of Crossrail. You'll notice these bits then, the vertical curves that allow that to actually happen. So the actual connection between the rising or falling grade and then coming into the nominally flat sort of station box. So when I went on my little adventure, I went down the big shaft into going down into which shaft would it have been? Where are all those allotments? Anyway, there, down into the shaft, inside, down all these steps, which is tremendous fun, into the actual Crossrail tunnel. Before they'd even put they'd kind of put the primary sort of tarmacy sort of slab in of concrete. They hadn't actually put the track slab in at this point. So I had to walk along, and this is now the view back up towards. This is where I was stood a second ago. Here, looking down. So this is looking down that slope. Or rather, this is me walking up the hill towards the station and looking in, and you can see the angle of the platform there. You can sort of see the vanishing point. To give you an idea of like the angle difference between what I'm stood at now, going up the hill, and then the actual platform itself, right? So again, this is what it looks like when you come up into the station. You can see that this is where the platform edge is, where the platform screen, the screen doors would be. This is where the track slab was then laid, and so on and so on and so forth, right? So that's kind of the void in behind, a little sneak peek of what that looks like. And so if you can imagine, you've got our end of platform as kind of is located there. If you wanted to raise the track, even by 185 millimeters, right? You've got to think about, there's one key thing you have to think about, which is the vertical swept path of the trains. So the gauge clearance of the trains coming through that tunnel. So if you lift the track, that swept profile suddenly starts chipping into the top corner of the interface between the board tunnel, the interface between the board pilot tunnel and the excavated station area, which would mean you would have to either you can just about squeeze the gauge clearance through, although I would doubt it because it's probably quite 185 millimeters is quite a chunk, or you have to do physical excavation. There are also some challenges possibly with the interface between the vertical curve and the platform that would require some thought, but there's some fat at either end of platforms generally on Crossrail, but so I think the major issue from a cost perspective is managing this vertical gauge envelope issue. As kind of that bit. You can see that is here. That's this bit. Excavating that adds a huge amount of complexity and cost to what is still, lifting 200 plus 250 meters of slab track is not a quick and easy task, even if it's fairly straightforward. Breaking that out, lifting it, laying in new slab, lifting it is still a fairly sizable task. But then this bit of work that's massive. And so if you've got here is here's Crossrail. So then the whole Elizabeth line. So what does that then look like in terms of cost? Well, you've got all of the underground stations that would be, my estimate is probably in the order of magnitude around 100 million quid per station. You've got the two big stations of Paddington and Liverpool Street with the kind of the surface station work, as well as the kind of the tunnels, the tunnel platforms. You've got Heathrow. And then you've also got Custom House and Abbey Wood, which have been built to 1100 millimeter platform height as well. So that's a sizable chunk of stuff that needs doing, right? That's a sizable chunk of stuff that needs doing. Add that up, what do you get? About 1.3 billion quid. So hence why I talk about this being a £1 billion design failure, a £1 billion design flaw. That's what we're talking about here. So it's a sizable chunk of money, which means, flip it on its head, if you decided to take a different approach, you've got about £1.5 billion quid to spend. And that's before you talk about the new train fleet as well. So you've got about £1.5 billion quid to spend to reach in terms of spend before it makes sense to do the central section versus an alternative plan. So the question then is really, what's the compromise? What is the compromise? If you've got the kind of Crossrail layout here, and you're not going to adjust all those central section tunnels and stations, what are you going to do?
This is Abbey Wood, and it's kind of like the platonic ideal of an outlier station. This is at the current end of one of the Crossrail branches, the southeastern branch. That direction is Ebbsfleet, which is where Crossrail should have gone originally, and will hopefully eventually go, tying in with domestic high-speed services on HS1 going through there, or even international services perhaps going through there. That'd be good. Now, why is it the ideal? Well, this is a 4-platform station. It has fully segregated, the reason I was up here, by the way, it has fully segregated Crossrail operations. So the Elizabeth line runs as a fully segregated operation. No freight is running through here, no other passenger services running through here. You can see here, there it is, fully segregated. Goes off into that direction to central London as a train arrives behind me. Meanwhile, in this direction, it goes out to a terminating it has connections onto the main line, but it terminates out there, allowing for a revert. They plop a train back there for additional capacity, so they can pump trains through here, sending them out in that direction. But what is the key thing about this 4-platform station is that the Thameslink and South Eastern services over the fence over there have a standard national platform height, 950 millimeters. The segregated Crossrail platforms have an 1100 millimeter platform height, which means that you nominally get level boarding at this platform. So even though on the map, on the Crossrail map, it shows the white circle with the wheelchair in it, that's because of the other platforms. The Crossrail platforms are accessible. Now, is that an ideal condition? Yes, because eventually the trains running on those platforms over there should be low floor, which means that you'll have low floor 950 millimeter matching platforms over there, and you'll have 1100 millimeters over here. This is an example where you've got fully segregated operations. There's no freight on here, so these are the perfect conditions for why it makes more sense to retain the 1100 millimeters to basically double down on the mistakes made originally. But this is the right way to do things.
So That's all fine and good. So out to Abbeywood, you can see that kind of works. So, it resolves the issue on that branch. No work to be done actually on the Abbeywood branch. What about though the Anglia branch heading up to Shenfield? What about the services that are a situation where you do have the low floored trains running? Well, the right thing to do is to essentially stop running. Is if you have calls at Crossrail stations, at those intermediate stations up to Shenfield. Shenfield is nominally segregated, I think, from the top of my head. People shout at me from that. I did a lot of work on these stations. When I was working on Crossrail, pretty much all my work that I did was on Crossrail Anglia, the northeastern branch. Some off-peak station calls happen along the Crossrail lines, on the electric lines coming out. And what needs to happen is that they shouldn't be. It should all be Elizabeth line services. So anything that's Greater Anglia should be either calling at, if you're going to have to call it at that station because you want sort of an outer suburban link, then it needs to be calling at the other platforms, or you exclude the service and you rely on the fact that Crossrail, the Elizabeth line, runs such high frequency services. So that's how you resolve it. From a civil engineering perspective, it's not too challenging to get 1100 millimeters on those platforms on the electric sides, having done a lot of work to get it to 915, ironically. Actually, the way that the railway is being built along here, particularly with the old electrification, is that getting it to 1100 millimeters with a high platform is essentially putting it back closer to where it was 10 years ago. So yeah, it could be done. It'd be a pain in the backside, but it is doable. Again, all the work with electrification to make sure that's all working and safe, fine. But we've got a 1.5 billion quid budget at this point, remember, and that before we talk about rolling stock. So yeah, that's the right thing to do on the eastern side of Crossrail. So you get this nice segregation. So you'd have the situation where you'd have the platform segregation from Crossrail versus other services running to and from elsewhere. Mike, see, the reason Abbeywood doesn't have the blue dot is because the National Rail platforms do not offer level boarding, so they're not allowed to put a full blue dot because that would confuse a passenger if they think all platforms are level boarding. Essentially, that's the reason for that. Jen on the move. From my short time using a wheelchair, I really struggled with the even small gaps like what you see on the new level Elizabeth line platforms. Actually, absolutely, level boarding is by no means a perfect solution. And depending on wheelchair, depending on design of wheelchair, depending on what chair you have and what that interface looks like and how well maintained it is, that can be potentially still can be challenging. But it doesn't. You generally, if you've got someone with you, if you've got someone accompanying you, then you don't need the ramp. That means you can do independent travel, and it's far better than having a 200 millimeter gap. So it gives us a better, and Jen, I know you agree on this, gives us a better starting place. We can then strive to improve that interface more and more. But getting the whole network to have that not perfect, but far better interface gets us much further ahead in terms of widening the reach of the railways to many more people. Jen saying, admittedly, that's a skill issue on your part. No, it's not, Jen. It's not. Lots of the people on the campaign acknowledge that that level boarding is not the end of the story. But getting everything to that position gets us at least much closer to fully independent travel for everyone. But what about the west? What about going the other side of Paddington towards Reading and Heathrow? What does that look like?
Ealing Broadway is a typical example. You've got the mainline platforms over here that don't see much service. The nerds in the chat will tell me exactly how often they get service, but they're kind of, the platforms are a shambles over there because it's not used very often. I think essentially just under duress. Over here you've got the Crossrail platforms, Ealing Broadway. You've also got all the underground stuff over there, which is great. It's a very useful interchange station. Ealing Broadway has a huge structure over the top, which is very common for the Anglia stations at the other side of Crossrail, the other side of Elizabeth line. What do you do about this mess? Well, firstly, there's no cheap way to do it. The ideal situation is that you need to straighten the platforms that the Elizabeth line calls at. Doing that would require you to basically write off these platforms, the mainline platforms, the ones behind me that the GWR trains whiz through and never stop at. Sacrifice those such that you can improve the alignment of the Elizabeth line to have it all straight. Because, as a mainline train whizzes past, because you will never get freight off the Elizabeth line, much as the ideal Elizabeth line operation is that it is a completely segregated metro system. Because of the Great Western Railway, Great Western Main Line has so much freight that feeds onto the relief lines that there is no way of getting freight off there. Now on straight platforms with a speed restriction, you can get freight, you can get all freight through 1100mm high platforms. As soon as you introduce any curvature, that becomes more challenging. Not impossible on a case-by-case basis, but it becomes much more challenging. And for those really curvy platforms in other parts of the network, that starts becoming impossible. Heathrow Express.
Oh, there's a thing that I meant. There's more that I wanted to say there, actually. You know what? You can see me say that again because I overzealously jumped forward. There's more to say. Just a sec.
Ealing Broadway is a typical example. You've got the mainline platforms over here that don't see much service. The nerds in the chat will tell me exactly how often they get service, but they're kind of, the platforms are a shambles over there because it's not used very often. I think essentially just under duress. Over here you've got the Crossrail platforms, Ealing Broadway. You've also got all the underground stuff over there, which is great. It's a very useful interchange station. Ealing Broadway has a huge structure over the top, which is very common for the Anglia stations at the other side of Crossrail, the other side of Elizabeth Line. What do you do about this mess? Well, firstly, there's no cheap way to do it. The ideal situation is that you need to straighten the platforms that the Elizabeth Line calls at. Doing that would require you to basically write off these platforms, the mainline platforms, the ones behind me that the GWR trains whiz through and never stop at. Sacrifice those such that you can improve the alignment of the Elizabeth Line to have it all straight. Because, as a mainline train whizzes past, because you will never get freight off the Elizabeth Line, much as the ideal Elizabeth Line operation is that it is a completely segregated metro system. Because of the Great Western Railway, Great Western Main Line has so much freight that feeds onto the relief lines that there is no way of getting freight off there. Now on straight platforms with a speed restriction, you can get freight, you can get all freight through 1100mm high platforms. As soon as you introduce any curvature, that becomes more challenging. Not impossible on a case-by-case basis, but it becomes much more challenging. And for those really curvy platforms in other parts of the network, that starts becoming impossible. Heathrow Express.
Find the gap between the train and the platform. For your own safety, stand behind the yellow line, walk behind the yellow line.
So let's talk about Ealing Broadway in more detail. As a 345 pulls in, why do I want to explain this to you? Because we're on the outside of a curve here, and the tracks, despite almost every train stopping here, the tracks are canted. The result of that being that the gap between the train and the platform edge, the PTI, the platform train space, is absolutely enormous. If I look behind me here, that is a huge gap. I'm going to drop in a video here of someone struggling, just someone trying to get on, stepping on. It's horrible.
You've seen it already.
This gap is huge. Now, why is that a problem? Well, it's a problem because there's children trying to step off. It is just dismal. This is a busy station. The PTI risk here is absolutely enormous. We're hopping on. The PTI risk here is absolutely enormous. And in terms of the things that can be done about it, look at that gap. In terms of the things that can be done about it, firstly, recanting the track is not a bad start, because I'd be fascinated to know the balance of stopping versus non-stopping trains at Ealing Broadway. I think most trains stop here, in which case, why is the track canted? If every train is stopping here, then it should be 0mm cant, which would instantly solve the problems. The next challenge is that both platforms at Ealing Broadway are low. So then what do you need to do to solve those low platforms? Well, firstly, if you raise up the platforms, then that creates a bit of a steep slope. I decided not to hop on. A steep slope to the back of the platform, but it's better to have a steep slope away from the platform than it is towards the tracks. So at least by lifting the platform, you resolve that problem. Dropping the track is absolutely also an option through here. The key thing is, if you're starting to affect platforms, you're affecting things like lift thresholds. So the actual threshold from the platform into the lift, which obviously can't be a step or a steep ramp for accessibility reasons. So the right thing to do here is to drop the track. What are the challenges for dropping the track? Well, in that direction, bridges, you could drop the track here. I suspect reasonably pain-free, depending on what buried services and other things there are underneath. My proposal at this station would be to drop the track. But would that solve the curvature issue? Because the curvature here is fairly, it's not steep, but it's not insubstantial. And I would guess that freight might find this a challenge if you drop the track sufficient to get your 1100mm platform height. Let's get on, because we need to talk about Old Oak Common itself as someone tries to get a buggy up onto it. The gap is, so I'm going to experience this, it is genuinely enormous. There's luggage, there's all sorts. This is an interchange for people coming across London to get over to Heathrow, and the gap is absolutely unacceptable. Anyway.
So, lots of interesting chat going on. Sorry about my bad on the fly editing. Lots of interesting chat going on. Plants McGee is asking if this standard, if there are standardized platform heights and trains, then why are there such huge gaps? See all previous level boarding episodes that we've done. So just search Rail Nat level boarding, you'll get a clear answer to that. But everyone else in the chat has absolutely dropped in. Dylan 32023 absolutely spot on. We've been buying trains that didn't match our national standard platform height, and we've got lots of legacy platforms that we've spent decades avoiding doing work on, despite the fact that we should have been upgrading those to get those platforms standardized. So yeah, that's why we're in the mess that we're in now across the whole network. But the specific situation of the Elizabeth line through the new station, through Old Oak Common, this brand new station that's being built, I think I've painted a picture as to why 1100mm makes good sense. But there are a few challenges. So if you've got there's 8 platforms on the Great Western Main Line station. This is looking towards central London, by the way, this picture. So you've got the 4 Great Western platforms are on the inside of the curve. The outside of the curve, you've got the 4 Elizabeth Line platforms. Now, those 4 Elizabeth Line platforms will be built 1100mm. The Great Western platforms will be built 915mm. So you have, similar to the Abbey Wood situation, you've got 2 different platform heights to provide that interface. But what about GWR's services out of London? So whether it's Thames Valley or whether it's the kind of those suburban services that GWR run with GWR trains, what about those? Well, the 800s, well, at the moment they're high floored, so it's kind of irrelevant, and they are going to be scrapped far quicker than their contract says, because they are falling to bits. So they're going to have to get replaced, and if they get replaced, it will be with a low floor train, because we've won that. As you see past Rail Nat, we've won that battle. But what about the other stuff? These trains? Well, again, the turbos, the network of turbos, are due for replacement. Low floor fleet. The 387s, the Electrostars, are, they've got a bit of life left in them, but again, when they are renewed, it will be with a low floor train. Actually, what should happen is that you don't run any of these services. Those Thames Valley services should all be Crossrail services. They should actually all be run by the Elizabeth Line. Now, why is that relevant for our Elizabeth Line platforms? The issue we've got at these stations, particularly at Old Oak Common, will be that at Old Oak Common, actually, let's just get my face back up. At Old Oak Common, 99% of trains will be Elizabeth Line. 99% of passengers will be on the Elizabeth Line, therefore we'll have level boarding by Natrail. GWR want to run some off-peak services, some first and last trains, and some disrupted services through those relief line platforms as well. My response to that would be, don't. But okay, operationally, if you want to be able to do that, the challenge you've got is that when those new fleets do eventually arrive, they will be low floor, so you'll have to step down from the platform into the train, which is absolutely less than ideal. So, in terms of all those other stations, by the way, there is a lot to do on those stations. And some of those stations, getting the segregation, the service segregation, is going to be extremely challenging. That is without a doubt. But will it exceed £1.5 billion? I don't think so. Talking of the Thames Valley services, yeah, you'll note that Crossrail originally was going to, let's briefly get my medium-sized face up here. Crossrail was originally going to be running to, not just to Reading, but to Chalfont and Latimer. So that's, in this situation, up that funny bit of what is the Chiltern service now, isn't it? But also, later versions, it was going to be running to Kingston, so it's going to be running, doing some of these services around Richmond, Gunnersbury, plus also, should really have taken consideration for those Thames Valley services as well. It didn't in the end. Also, what's interesting is that if I want to get rid of my face again, you can see that Crossrail would have run to Ebbsfleet down here as well. So it would have run beyond Abbeywood through Belvedere, Erith, Slade Green, Dartford, Stonecross and Greenhithe, Swanscombe. Yeah, there we go. So, Crossrail very much de-scoped on its outer sections. So what about all these challenges with Old Oak Common? So it's in saying, right, you have high platforms. There are challenges, right? So you've got the step down, but there are 4 factors that kind of minimise the step down risk. So first of those is, as I've said already, less than 1% of forecast passengers using platforms 5 to 8 will be on trains that will in future have a low floor design. The risks of harm presented by a step up to the platform versus a step down to the train have been assessed to be lower than a high train footstep and a lower platform. So it is nominally less risk stepping down into a train than it is stepping down onto a platform. Work has been undertaken to confirm that the use of an internal ramp from the platform down into low-floor trains is feasible. So that's using the Stadler fleet as a test case. It is possible to fit internal ramps, to have a design of internal ramp that can be fitted. And the thing that we have, as a campaign, have said vigorously is that the use of low-floor trains on these platforms is expected to be managed and should be managed as a special working by the station operator, with additional protections put in place according to suitable risk assessment. This might include additional on-train announcements, extra staffing, under-platform lighting. We might see the first use on the main line of those kind of under-platform LED lights within the coping stones, ways to just mitigate the risk that show to passengers something different is happening here. From an ergonomic perspective, you are going to know that something is different because you should have been warned on the train that you are in a situation that is different. You're going into different platforms than the trains will normally call at. So there are lots of ergonomic things that reduce risk, but it should be managed as a special working, not as a standard performance. So as people going that, there'd be Thames Valley towns like Goring and Streatley or Henley-on-Thames would have a very slow journey into London if their local train services were part of Crossrail. Perhaps if you started running a more complex stopping pattern, you'd kind of account for some of that. But you'd also improve it by the fact you'd have much higher frequencies to those locations than you do now. So you might lose some journey time, but you'd gain generalised journey time from the increase in frequency of service. So, what about freight? I've actually mentioned this already. I've talked about the fact that freight is okay. So, with a 915mm platform, this is some cross sections of kind of dynamic and static gauges of freight, kind of container freight is the most egregious. Sort of, actually, W6A is the worst at the platform edge rather than the boxes. But anyway, you can see some of the boxes here, the profiles. 915mm platform, straight track, curved track down to 360 meters will always be clear. Where you have the 1100mm platform, you can still be clear up to certain speeds with for container traffic for those kind of most egregious freight loads. So you can run freight down to certain curvatures, within limits with those high platforms. It doesn't write off the use of freight on those lines. So it is compatible to do the two. But making freight continue to be compatible will require freight speed restrictions or platform straightening or additional S&C to get freight to run on to the flatter of the curve. There are different ways operationally to do it that are more or less messy, but freight doesn't need to be a problem with this approach. And what are the last bits in the letter? You've seen sort of the first 2 pages of the letter. The last kind of things that we point out within the letter, firstly, is that this solution must not set a precedent elsewhere. There are specific reasons why what we've endorsed, what the campaign has endorsed at Old Oak Common are acceptable. Very specific reasons that I've laid out in this video. It must not set a precedent elsewhere. For example, Thameslink. I would argue very strongly that a very different set of a very different approach needs to be taken, which is that you need to procure. There's too much outer network, far too much. You need to get rid of those stupid humps, the high platforms in the central section, procure low floor trains for the future of Thameslink. A very different set of solutions, and the whole rest of the country should be 915mm low floor trains without exception. This chap, Philip, a shout out to Phil here, because Philip has the role of technical sponsor for level boarding, which is a role that should be made mandatory. So shout out to Phil, who's enabled this, who's put a lot of work, personal effort into making this work, making all of the moving parts all the stakeholders get involved, get kind of understand what the story is here. Not all of them are, GWR are still not hugely happy about this, but they're on their journey. And that's because of the work that Phil has put in. If you want to, you can go and see a really detailed breakdown of what this level boarding solution looks like and the work that's gone into it. There's a link in the description. There's a Rail AI presentation from earlier this year that you can go and watch that gives a really nice bit of detail. So the link's in the description for that one. But the technical sponsor for level boarding role should be made mandatory. What better way to show that level boarding is being taken seriously by every single project involving a station having a mandatory technical sponsor for level boarding? That would be really, really something. And I think that role should be made permanent, and the campaign absolutely advocates for that. If you want more Rail Natter, by the way, tonight's bonus is looking at integrated transport strategy. The integrated transport strategy has landed, and we're going to page turn it. You might think, what? Not in a mainline episode? No, we're doing it. We've got so much that I want to be getting through on mainline episodes that we're actually going to dump. Possibly because I don't think this document will be particularly good. We're going to dump the integrated transport strategy page turn tonight. That will happen tonight. We'll go through a quick flick through to see if there's anything worthwhile within the National Integrated Transport Strategy that just landed. That should be interesting. £5 and above gets you access to those bonuses and quite a bit more. 40 plus bonus episodes now under our belt as well. So plenty for you to chew through. Some news. So, the countdown to spring 2027 and the Weaver network continues. Here we can see a really nice picture of a new electric bus depot that's looking quite smart here. We need more bus depots. Bus depots are a critical thing. We have lost central city bus depot capacity, and so the fact that this is being deployed and not sold off to make houses is really, really positive, because you cannot deliver a good bus frequency without good bus depot positions, and with an electric service, with electric buses, good charging capacity as well. So that's really good news, and it's part of the Weaver network, right? This is Leeds. We did the episode recently on Leeds on the Weaver network. The intention is that would be an integrated system. I quite like the look of it. I think it's kind of fun. It looks snazzy. It's kind of cool. Again, with the bikes as well. Currently the LNER branded bikes, but yeah, get them all branded as Weaver Network. That's great. Of course, as my face is cutting through here, of course, we went through Leeds in great detail. So for those who want to look at what the condition of Leeds' transport is, then go back a couple of episodes to look at the state of Leeds' transport. Spoiler alert, it's not good. But what else? So you'll notice we had the buses, electric buses, great. The bikes are integrated there. There's something missing is trains. There is a plan for rail. There is a plan for West Yorkshire that's kind of related to this. There is a kind of a West Yorkshire Combined Authority plan for rail. Interestingly, within that plan is this little bit of shade. Network North, whatever that was, insert metal now. Network North removed the ability to extend HS2 services to Leeds, but has committed to looking at how to improve connectivity between the North East, West Yorkshire, South Yorkshire and the Midlands. The anticipated outputs of IRP Network North leave substantial gaps in capacity and connectivity for West Yorkshire. Absolutely. Further, it is noted that the upgrade of existing lines rather than the construction of new lines adds considerable disruption for a significant period of time to the network that could otherwise be reduced. We'll also ensure that upgrades are not at the detriment of local services both now and into the future. So there we go. So there is some shade being thrown at the mess that was left over of decisions made by who's this nameplate behind me? The person whose responsibility it was for screwing up HS2 up to Leeds. Anyway, you'll notice then, trains are missing from here, but trams are on here, right? So trams are on this little graphic, this smart little graphic. Enter Sir John Armitt again, here to deny Leeds public transport. Again. Why? What's John Armitt doing? Well, this little leak that's landed with politics home, Leeds tram plan was working to unrealistic milestones, secret government report warned. What is this secret government report? Well, it's a NISTA report. NISTA, for those of you who remember, long-time Rail Natter followers will know that NISTA is the National Infrastructure and Service Transformation Authority, which, let's just see what's said, and then I'll tell you what that is, because exclusive. Tracy Braben's attempts to start construction on the Leeds tram network before her next re-election campaign were blocked after a confidential Whitehall review concluded this deadline carried a high risk of wasted taxpayers' cash. A lot less wasted than not building the thing. We need to be much less afraid of small change wastage on the basis of not building things. Good grief. Absolute accountancy brain. This review conducted by NISTA also found that not enough work had been done to prove why the scheme needed trams rather than buses. The paper's authors, authors, who are those people, were concerned about WICA, the Command Authority's lack of unbiased thinking on this question, adding, there is a need to build the case for trams which has not been completed. This is particularly important because the likely cost of a bus rapid transit, doesn't exist, just buses, mode is significantly less than for trams, and the BRT benefit to cost ratio is significantly better. Diseased minds. No, Tracy Brabin said she wanted mass transit, she wanted trams. Therefore, that's why she committed to trams, because there are 1,000 reasons why trams are known to be better than buses. Ways that your business case analysis cannot assimilate. So yeah, this is what delayed the trams from the mid-2030s to the late 2030s, cancelled, because of this report by NISTA. A WICA spokesperson said, beginning construction works by 2028 has been an ambition for the Command Authority for some time because the people of West Yorkshire have waited long enough for this investment. Remember last time it was cancelled? They made guided busways, which is BRT. So this is exactly what happened to the Supertram last time. NISTA's predecessor body, the National Infrastructure Commission, oh, wait a minute, who was in charge of that? Set out clearly in 2023 that Leeds needs a tram. A review at this stage of a project of this scale is completely normal. No, it's psychotic. And the majority of its recommendations have already been addressed by the Command Authority. Meanwhile, the DfT said the government fully supports Mayor Brabin's ambitions for a world-class mass transit system for West Yorkshire, adding, we look forward to receiving West Yorkshire Command Authority's initial business case for the project later this year, which is DfT throwing shade at Brabin's team again. A reminder, NISTA, 2025 it was created, formed from the merger of the Infrastructure and Projects Authority and the National Infrastructure Commission. The National Infrastructure Commission and now NISTA, both chaired by Sir John Armitt, who was in charge of the NIC when it wrote the rail needs assessment that created and basically fed straight into the integrated rail plan, which killed HS2. The Infrastructure and Projects Authority, formed by the merger of the Major Projects Authority and Infrastructure UK. Infrastructure UK was Partnerships UK in 2000, and in 1997 was created as the Treasury Task Force. It's all Treasury. It's all Treasury as far as it's all Treasury, folks. It's infinity Treasury, right the way down. Yeah, so not good. Trams should be coming. They should be delivered more quickly, and Brabin should be rebelling much more vigorously about this than she is. It's all Treasury. Anyway. The National Infrastructure and Service Transformation Authority. What will I be proposing as a policy measure related to this body as a package of policies for any potential future government? Abolish with absolute prejudice and without replacement. Get rid of it, sack everyone, and ensure they don't get jobs ever again. Until Treasury's gone, there will be no West Yorkshire trams. It's as simple as that. Meanwhile, let's look at some good news, which is in comparison to the West Midlands, there's some hope on identity. We've seen new stations open, and have they opened with the god-awful Rail Alphabet 2 identity? No, they haven't. They have opened with the fantastic West Midlands Railway local identity, giving me a bit of hope that that identity is going to survive the GBR nonsense and be retained for the urban mass transit system across modes in the West Midlands. Enough policy wonks watch Rail Natter and hear me ranting about this that I hope they've realised that to do anything else would be extremely stupid. We have a well-defined, what I think is very nice identity for rail as part of a wider mass transit and multimodal system in the West Midlands, and that should absolutely be retained. Meanwhile, the Northumberland line is an example of lots of things that are not good. Jen is going to join me for an episode talking about the Northumberland line at some point. Let's get it sorted, Jen. But in the northeast, you can see that Rail Alphabet 2 as a station identity, where you have something like the wonderful Calvert, it's a Calvert identity, the Tyne and Wear Metro kind of Calvert type, logo type and typeface. RA2 just doesn't have the sauce. It just looks rubbish, and frankly I think it's wherever I've seen Rail Alphabet 2 being rolled out for running inboards and things like this, it looks so weak compared to Rail Alphabet 1. I have to say, in its medium weight, I don't know, I'm not sold. I need to see the evidence on the accessibility point, because I'm just not sold on it. I'm really not sold on it. I just don't think it has the sauce. Now, I should have said everyone questions. So questions. What questions do you have? Well, let's do a bit of tracing through. So let's have a look and see. Let me go through and see. Those of you who've been atting my name to see questions. Does Thameslink have any fully high floor platforms, or is it just humps? Humps for St Pancras. I'm trying to remember Blackfriars, whether it's all high or whether it's humps. Blackfriars could be all high. Someone who's clever can remember this stuff. Tell me. So yeah, fine. Gareth got a selfie in the main square by the cathedral. If you're on Blue Sky, okay, that's fine. Oh, Köln. Okay, right, fine. Let's see. What video am I referring to? Oh, yes, the video about level boarding that was in the link. Absolutely, yeah. Phil's video is great. Did I see the article he tagged on shenanigans in Dublin Metro? I did. I need to get myself on top of that. Absolutely. Let's see. Where else? Doesn't the Wyker Line 1 plan basically parallel existing heavy rail lines? It does, Greg. And I remain a bit puzzled as to why those particular lines are being prioritised. Yeah. See also the episode we did in Leeds where I talk about what is where and the shape of the priority pathways, the priority corridors for Leeds. That episode was done very deliberately. So yeah, I'm really pleased that that there is movement on the buses. That's really positive. But yeah. So yeah, lots of electrification will be needed for the Thames Valley services to use the Crossrail trains. Yeah, absolutely. You could try and get away with some of the branches using battery on the 345, the 345-2s or whatever the new ones are going to be called. There are options. Yeah, a lot of white in that station name. Yeah, absolutely. Do 950mm floor trains cost more than 1100mm floor trains? No, not really. You just have to ask for them. And the fact is that we won that battle. All the new trains are going to be low floored now. Campaign for level boarding won that battle. We've done it. London Bridge is probably the trickiest station to fix the Thameslink humps at, since the lift escalators go to the hump rather than the correct height. Yeah, agreed. That's going to be a pain in the backside, for sure. Plant McGee keeps saying, why not scrap all trains and platforms not standard height? Because that would not. How and when would you do that? Yeah, great. We have a hard enough time getting the Treasury to spend a few £100 million on a tram line. They're not going to completely scrap and replace all trains. No, the thing to do is to wait for the trains to expire, to build platform. High floor plate trains are compatible with the 950mm platform height, because that's the interface as it has looked as standard for since the middle of the last century. So no, the right thing to do is to set all platforms to standard whenever you're doing work with them. And buy low floor trains. So, should Northumberland line actually be part of the Tyne Metro? Yes, it absolutely should. It can. The trains, all the trains are full. It's running at full capacity. It desperately needs to have been part of the metro, either literally part of the metro, or at least should have been branded and fully integrated into the Tyne Metro or the Nexus identities. There is a rail identity. They could have been using that. It's a nice purple, I believe. Why isn't the Camp Hill line electrified? Extremely good question. Yeah, Network fan. Very, very good question. Because Treasury, absolutely. And the last thing I'll say on this before we close out is what should happen with HS2 and level boarding? HS2 is such a mess at this point that we're building the physical stations are being built. In some ways, that interface is being locked in, and it'll be a high platform connection. It is absolutely the wrong decision, and we have a chance, if we are tearing up contracts with train manufacturers, we have a chance to set that correct, because there is never going to be a dedicated HS2 fleet ever, and therefore those trains will all be running on the existing network to a greater or lesser extent. They should be built to have low floors. They should be built to be fully compatible. How that is delivered, whether it's delivered through the whole train or in sections. People often ask, can you have one bit of the train that's low floor? No, because low floor trains, level boarding benefits absolutely everyone, not just disabled people, not just people in a wheelchair, not just people with buggies and luggage. It benefits absolutely everyone. So it should be that the whole platform and the whole train delivers level boarding. Anyway, time to close out, I think.
The Elizabeth line is a spectacular piece of infrastructure that London instantly could not live without. Now, putting aside arguments about the fact that every major city in the UK deserves Crossrail level capacity infrastructure, the mistake made related to accessibility has all sorts of reasons why it happened, and there are all sorts of ways to resolve it. There is a pathway to reverse those mistakes, even if it results in that fundamental incompatibility. And I hope in this video I've explained why Old Oak Common should not set the precedent, but it does allow us to understand an approach that allows the Elizabeth line to maximise what it does without getting in the way of the rest of the railway network. The scale of the mistake, but the scale of the potential opportunity it creates by forcing policymakers into a different call. And I also think about the enormous difference in work, in scale of transport work going on. To make this discussion seem so abstract and so out there in terms of how to deal with it, only can be paired with a lack of imagination and the massive lack of ambition when it comes to transport in London, when you compare to, you know, the next door major city of Paris and what's been going on there in terms of infrastructure. So you might say, well, that's a lot of cost. It really isn't. For the scale of passenger travel on Elizabeth Line, matched on to the necessary ambition for one of the world's massive cities, this stuff should be we should be swallowing this sort of work very, very easily. As I wander across from the bizarrely disconnected Crossrail and Jubilee Line stations, I'm reminded that this is what transport enables. It enables, well, capital for better or worse, but crucially it enables spaces that otherwise would have no purpose, no ability to exist. And ultimately that's what it's all about. Everyone, have a good evening, and I will see you all next week. Cheerio!
We're not quite done yet, though, folks, because we've entered back into British Rail classes again. And I forgot to last week. British Rail Class 302 exists. It's a Mark 1 based electric multiple unit here, AC with overhead electrification. The AC overhead electrification, actually. The 303, however, tonight's episode, is the fantastic Blue Train, of course, with its wonderful original curved glass, with that rich turquoise. The Blue Trains were great, and there is a book coming very soon that I'm delighted to be letting you all, that I'll be teasing for all of you soon. Not from me, I've written the foreword for it, but on the Blue Train and on its place, its rightfully important place in history. Anyway, that's right, a little bonus back bit. Bye everyone, bye bye.